as folks filter in here. Thank you so much for joining us. I just am trying to push all the buttons and make sure that everyone who wants to be in can get in. So that's going and we're live. Perfect. Welcome everyone. Good evening. Thank you all so much for joining our live virtual event tonight with former Army Ranger Ray McPadden, the author of We March at Midnight, in conversation with writer and veteran David Abrams. I'm your host, Jessica, here at Country Bookshelf on the ancestral unceded land of the Apsalaki Crow, Salish Kootenai, Cheyenne, Shoshone Bannock, and Ochady-Chacon people. We encourage those of you joining us from outside Bozeman to learn more about the land you occupy and the stories of its peoples. We're delighted you've joined us for a timely and riveting discussion of We March at Midnight. Be sure to sign up for our newsletter to stay up to date on all the happenings at Country Bookshelf, and follow us on Eventbrite to register for more great upcoming events, including next week's King Arthur Remixed with E.K. Johnston, Kirsten White, Preeti Chibber, and Laura Sebastian. Before we get to Ray and David, I do want to point out a few things about our virtual space. First of all, those of you that haven't yet purchased your copy of We March at Midnight, along with Brave Deeds and Fobbit, can do so at the link that will be arriving in the chat momentarily. If you didn't purchase your copy with registration, please visit that link and you can order a million of them, as I'm sure you'll want to do. We are recording tonight's event, so it will be viewable later on the Country Bookshelf YouTube channel after the event concludes. If you have any questions for Ray and David, you can drop them at the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen or in the chat, and we'll get to them as time allows. If you run into any tech issues along the way, we recommend first exiting and re-entering our webinar today. If that doesn't work, there is a live stream going on that Country Bookshelf YouTube channel, so you can look for us there. And if you're having trouble with sound, usually headphones will fix the issue. This is a shared creative space that we do want to remain safe for everyone that's joined us tonight. So please be respectful. Offensive or inappropriate comments will see the user dismissed from the space. So without further ado, Ray McPadden is a 4-tour combat veteran who served as a ground force commander in the elite 2nd Ranger Battalion during the Iraq and Afgan Wars. He was awarded a Purple Heart, 2 Bronze Stars, and a Medal for Valor. A former Pat Tillman military scholar, he is the author of the acclaimed novel And the Whole Mountain Burned, winner of the those letters got smushed in my brain there for a second. W.Y. Boyd Literary Award for Excellence in Military Fiction in 2019. He lives in Livingston, Montana with his wife and children. David Abrams, the author of Fobbit and Brave Deeds. Fobbit was named a New York Times Notable Book of the Year and a finalist for the Art Cedenham Award for First Fiction. And Brave Deeds he served in the U.S. Army for 20 years and was deployed to Iraq in 2005 as part of a public affairs team. He was named the Department of Defense's Military Journalist of the Year in 1994 and received several other military commendations. His stories have appeared in Esquire, Glimmer Train, Narrative, and other publications. And he's joining us from Butte, Montana this evening. So thank you both so much for joining us. I'm so excited to hear all you have to share with us about We March at Midnight. I'm going to disappear for a little bit, and then I'll be back on to share questions from our audience. You can leave those questions at any time. Ray and David, take it away.
Great. Hi, everybody. Thanks, Jessica. And thanks especially to the Country Bookshelf for hosting this event tonight. I am really excited to be here tonight. My name's David Abrams, if you can't see already on the bottom of the screen there. I'm the author of Fobbit, which was published in 2012. It's a satirical look at the lives and deaths of the soldiers who live on a forward operating base, or FOB, in Iraq, set during 2005-ish, which coincidentally was the time that I served with the 3rd Infantry Division in the Army over there in Baghdad during that year. My second novel, Brave Deeds, came out in 2017. And it follows a cast of just six soldiers, whereas Fobbit had a large cast. Brave Deeds has a more condensed cast of characters. And they have gone AWOL, absent without leave. In other words, they've escaped the Army over from their FOB. They snuck off the FOB, stolen a Humvee, and their new mission now is to trek their way across Baghdad to attend a memorial service for their NCO who had been killed in a bomb attack earlier. So those are my two novels, kind of light and dark sides of the war. But what I'm really interested in learning more about tonight is Ray's experience and his time writing about war and his really intense experiences. So I'll let Ray just say a few words of introduction to We March at Midnight, and then I'll shoot you a question, Ray.
All right. Yeah, thanks, David. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. So my new book is We March at Midnight, and it's about war, leadership, and family. And it's centered around two big events in my life. One was I helped to build the first outpost in Afghanistan's deadliest valley. That's the Korangal Valley. It's in the Hindu Kush Range in eastern Afghanistan. And then the second big event in the book is I was a leader in the first combined special operations unit of Army Rangers and Navy SEALs, so working together jointly to carry out strategic missions in Iraq. So those are two, kind of big events that structure the book. There's three themes I think that are important. Obviously, the first is war, and it was important to me for the reader to really have an immersive experience. I wanted people to come along and be in the foxhole next to me and be on a night patrol in the mountains with my platoon and really, have that sort of authentic look at what it means to serve in the infantry and to fight in a modern war. The next big theme is leadership. I offer tips and lessons with myself as the kind of the guinea pig on display, and I do not present myself as a superhero. I present a lot of things where I made mistakes and I was learning, and I got better from it. I got stronger from it. So I'm certainly a flawed character. And I think for other people, it's important to, I think, present yourself honestly and that others can learn and grow from sort of hearing other people and their experiences and the mistakes they made. And then the last big theme, right, is family. I was wildly in love during my combat tours and married, and I remain so today. And so, it's not just you, that goes to war. Your spouse, your family, I think they come along with you on that experience, and the things that happen to you are happening to them as well. So the book was really a chance to explore and kind of depict some of the things that were happening in our lives and in our marriage, Elizabeth and I, my wife. And again, as an example to others of, here's some things you can learn from. We are not the perfect couple. We fight, we have problems, and but ultimately we get better from the experience and grow stronger, and I think are inseparable now based on just all the crucible of conflict. So the last thing I just wanted to say as part of the introduction was, I wrote this book 10 years after my last combat tour, and that time and that space away from fighting really, I think, equipped me with some wisdom about what happened in Iraq and Afghanistan, what it meant for me in the long run, and then I think what it meant for some of the wonderful people that I served with overseas. I think it would have been a very different book had I written it, sort of right after I had gotten back. So I think that the time and a little bit of space from the direct fighting gave me just tremendous wisdom about what happened. So that's We March at Midnight in a nutshell, David.
Very good. And you've touched on all those different themes, and I want to get back to a lot of those. One of the things I thought was really interesting that you mentioned that I hadn't even really picked up on. I guess I was just kind of swept up in the narrative of the book, if you will. But you say, the book is full of lessons, which is, in hindsight, as a reader, it's true. But I didn't feel like this was a leadership instruction book. So I don't want people to be, scared off by the thought that it might be, in sort of a leadership kind of a book. But you do pick up those lessons along the way, and you really integrate it really well, I thought, into the book. So kudos to you for that. That's an aspect of the book I hadn't even really picked up on. So.
Yeah, thanks. And I think, with everything in the book, it's not like, let me tell you about this in a textbook dry way of like, let me walk you through these 4 leadership principles. It's about, okay, here's the real thing. Here's what's happening. And I think I was very selective about like what I included in there, because there's years and years of material, right? There was very, very careful selection of things that I was like, I think this is interesting for other people. I think people can relate to this, whether, they're firefighters or first responders, or you work in the corporate world. I think things that are just had some sort of universal lesson to them.
Yeah, let's talk about, speaking of lessons, let's talk about the kind of the elephant in the room right now. And that's, the recent events that we've seen unfolding over in Afghanistan, the pullout of the American forces, the perhaps, surprisingly to some of us, not everybody, but some of us, it's surprisingly sudden collapse of the forces in the government over there. So what are your thoughts and feelings? How have you been handling this news in the wake of all the time that you spent over there and work with these people, work with the Afghans, and work with the existing government as best they could? What are your thoughts and feelings now, seeing what's happening?
Yeah, I think a lot of people, David, who were there and like on the ground, especially interacting with Afghan army, Afghan police, I think many had a sort of this feeling that it wasn't, going to end with a strong, lasting, centralized democracy over there, because that's really like where the rubber meets the road, right? Is that like some of those basic institutions that we were trying to build. So I think, I always saw a lot of things that were sort of alarming, whether it was Afghan army, guys, smoking weed on patrols, selling their ammo, kind of walking off in the middle of missions. And I think it wasn't because we weren't trying our very best, but I think just the sort of core values that we were trying to sort of get them to grab hold of and adopt were it was a bridge too far. So part of me was not surprised about the way it turned out. And these are things that, I sort of cover in the book, some of those like on the ground, like, oh gosh, this isn't going well. But the suddenness of it was certainly a shock. And, for me, and I think for a lot of people who maybe had been in Afghanistan, but then had sort of left the military and been out for a little while, I think a lot of people had sort of put it away in history to some extent. And then to have it sort of all come back, to have it one end so quickly, and then two, obviously for it to end, badly, in terms of the bigger things we were trying to accomplish, I think was shocking, and it was painful. It was brutal. I mean, just watching the last, like that 2-week evacuation, was like this slow motion nightmare. It really was. So it was tough. I've got, I think, ultimately I feel good about everything that I did over there. And I'd like to, talk about that a little bit, David, but I'll maybe when the time is right.
Oh, sure. And so it has been kind of disheartening. It has been very disheartening to watch. And what would you say to fellow veterans who've served either in Afghanistan or Iraq or any war, with, I'm sure a lot of people have a lot of mixed feelings right now, anger, depression, and pride in the job that they did, but also, was it worth it, or what was the cost of what we did over there? So what would you say to those people who are dealing with those kind of feelings?
Well, I think one thing that's really important is like reach out to, for other veterans who might be listening, or if there's veterans in your family somewhere, is I used this time, I sort of got past the initial shock, and then, reached out to some old battle buddies and just talked to them. And we didn't necessarily talk about, we talked about Afghanistan to some extent, in current events there, but we talked about like our tours and just like what we did together. And, it was a lot of good memories. So, I reached out to a lot of people just to kind of reconnect with them, where like time and, sort of lives go in different directions, and it sort of lost track of some people. So, on the upside of this is, it's like reach out to your old battle buddy and just say hi, and see how they're doing. And it's actually been really sort of enjoyable to reach out to guys from 2nd Ranger Battalion and
That's great.
10th Mountain. Yeah.
And yeah, I think that is good advice, to seek out, especially those who know what you've been through, or what they've been through too. So
yeah.
Sure.
And I think, kind of the message, David, for people, to me, is, like my message to people I serve with, to others who have been in Afghanistan, is everything you did matters over there. And it matters a great deal that you volunteered to serve. That doesn't mean you had to carry a rifle to make a contribution. You could have been stateside, just supporting the bigger campaigns. The fact that you served matters. And then the way you served, right? It's just like, to use a sports analogy, it's like, how did you play? How did you represent yourself as a member of the armed forces? How were you as a leader, and sort of the impact you had on the lives of others around you? I think that matters a great deal. It matters, I think, ultimately, like whether we win or we lose, that matters, but I think it's a small percentage of that bigger sort of picture of meaning for people. So I certainly place more emphasis on how, the fact that one, you served, or that a family member served, and two is the way you served, and that you did it honorably, and that you did your very best. And then winning, sort of the final score is, I think, of far less importance. But, I would also be lying, David, be totally bullshitting you to say that, like, we don't keep score as Americans. We want to win, right? And so that, that hurts, it stings. And it's going to take some time for that to kind of heal up,
Right. And you mentioned that you kind of saw the writing on the wall even while you were in country, or over the course of your different tours. And this might be a good time, hint, maybe might want to read a little bit from the book. There's a part in there that you describe going back to some. Well, I'll let you talk about it, but you do go back to some of the places that you'd been to earlier in the war and saw the changes or not changes. So why don't you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I had a very unique experience, and that's that I went back to, I was in Afghanistan twice, and on the second tour, I went back to the exact same places, the same villages. I saw the same people, and I saw them, about 4 years apart. So, you talk about a measuring stick on kind of the war and on the people sort of living in the war every day. It was a fascinating experience. So I'm just going to do just a few quick, like a couple paragraphs here on me being in. I volunteered as part of this reconnaissance mission. I ended up in this convoy of Humvees going up the Pesh River Road, which is one of the really truly dangerous roads in Afghanistan. The 5-truck convoy leaves Camp Joyce in the rain. Me driving the 3rd Humvee. We twist through the streets of Asadabad and veer left into the Pesh River Valley. A few miles up, we halt for a tire change. My eyes are riveted to the land. Everything is familiar, and I cannot help dismounting the Humvee and striding along the lane. There is a strange sense of homecoming. I spin in a circle, drinking in the land. The banda with the poppy field on the grassy hill is still there, and so is the yellow schoolhouse where I had my first firefight. Here is the land where I grew up. We drive on. The positions we built in 2006 are still here, except patrol bases have become outposts. Outposts have become camps, and camps have become bases. Our footprint is bigger, cleaner. Some things are the same. bomb craters in the road, bullet holes in the sandbags of passing outposts. Even the Humvee I drive, which has a hole in the rear panel from a rocket, is a reminder we have not come far. The soaring ridge where I fell wounded appears, and in my turbid state, I ask, am I lucky or cursed? And let me unpack that. Few warriors in Iraq and Afghanistan return to the same places they have already been. Many multi-tour veterans see the same country. Some manage to see the same region. A small percentage see the same provinces, like my old unit. A fraction see the same exact bases, returning to Jalalabad Airfield, Salerno, Tikrit, Baghdad Airfield. They know which way to go at the roundabout. And only a minuscule number return to the same villages and valleys, remembering the boy by the bazaar, finding him still beneath the mulberry, a little older, his eyes harder than before.
That's some wonderful stuff there. And I was really struck by that when I was reading it too. Just returning to that, it's pretty amazing. And you mentioned there's a line in there having to do with, this is the land where I grew up. So that kind of segues into another question I was going to ask. I kind of can see you growing as a person over the course of the book. Like at the beginning, I kind of had to laugh when you were on the eve of the departure, and your wife is really upset at your leaving, and you basically say, "Don't worry, hon, it's just going to be one big hiking trip over there in Afghanistan." And I kind of had to laugh when I read that. And obviously, you get sobered up really quick once you get in country. Talk a little bit about the evolution of your quote unquote character as you move throughout the book.
Yeah, I had some of the best training that the Army and I think the bigger military establishment has to offer. But there's there's nothing that like truly gets you ready to fight. And I think the fight in Afghanistan was really interesting in that platoons, right? So you're kind of small core like groups of the sort of the fighting parts of the military are built around are really on their own. So not only are you in this situation where you're like, okay, I've had training, but I don't know that I'm really ready for this. But you're also just totally isolated, where you've got lieutenants, you've got sergeants, E6 squad leaders that are in platoon sergeants they really are, they're young, they're in their early 20s in many cases, and they're totally out there in the middle of a war zone, and there's not sort of somebody looking over your shoulder. So just the sense of like responsibility is sort of tremendous and can be overwhelming. And it was also really, for me initially, right? Like I was the naive rookie, and it's hard to not be that person. Mm-hmm. I think there's a lot of literature about like, young second lieutenants. And it's just like, oh my God, stay away from those guys. I saw a statistic once. It's like, it was like a Vietnam statistic. I think that the only people who are sort of more likely to die first in a firefight, the machine gun teams, right? Because they're like the enemy, so wants to target the machine gun teams is the second lieutenant, because it's you're trying to lead from the front and all the stuff that they taught you. And it's a lot of times you're just a bumbling idiot. And so I learned quickly, and a lot of those lessons came with like casualties. And and I was wounded early in my first tour. So that was a wake up call. And I was lucky in that, I was just wounded, and I handed, it was a sort of like a big slap in the face of like, this is serious here, and you need to take it seriously, and apply what you've been taught, and be really paying attention to the lessons that are sort of presenting themselves along the way.
And yet, as soon as you got to Germany, you were fighting to go right back. I mean, you were trying to get right back, right? I mean,
yeah, I had it was early enough, and it was like my first big firefight. Like we've been in some skirmishes, real gunfights, but like the first kind of really big contact, I got wounded, and And it was like, no way I'm done. Like, no way I'm done. I just had this sense of like, I'm just starting. And, there was also part of me too, where it was, it was serious enough that, I had a ticket to get out of there, and once you kind of get swept up into the wounded pipeline, I mean, it's, it's that pipeline empties back in the States for
Right.
basically everybody who wants it. And, so there was, obviously it's some soul searching to do there in Germany, which is kind of the intermediate point. That's like the big triage hospital for everybody's, wounded on the Afghan and Iraq battlefield. So I'm very proud of the fact that ultimately I went back. I had a way out of there after having been injured, and then went back. And that's something I'll always be very proud of, David.
Let's shift, and I agree with that. Let's shift gears. I want to talk about how you wrote this book. I mean, the book We March at Midnight is just rife with detail. And as we were talking beforehand, it really puts the reader, any reader, who, it doesn't matter if they've been served in the military or not, it puts the reader in those combat boots, in that situation, on that hill, on that road, in that Humvee. So the level of detail was just incredible. For myself, I know when I went over in 2006 or 2005 to Iraq, I kept a journal. I kept a journal every night. I wrote in there every night. But I could be wrong, but I felt like I might have had a little more free time than you did. I don't know. So I was just curious about the level or how you got all these details. Was it through remembering? Because you said it was, through your memories. Was it?
Yeah.
You started writing it 10 years after, I think you said. So how did you keep that level of detail? What'd you draw on?
What I had a bunch of was, and this is still like, we were far enough out there in Afghanistan that we didn't have email or computers for a while. Like, we were truly on foot, like fighting in the mountains and living out of rucksacks. And I was writing letters. Like, now it's like, what? Letters? And you would like write a letter and you put it in an envelope and it would go like snail mail back to Elizabeth. And so I was writing letters to her, and she kept a bunch of those letters. She's cool. She's like, she's nostalgic. She keeps stuff like that. Just like she keeps every drawing my daughter brings home from school, and she's young enough where you're like, that's cool, but do we have to keep every one? So she kept a bunch of those. And then like one day she kind of busted those out. And it blew me away. So I had a bunch of those. I drew from that. I drew from talking to guys I was there with. Some of the guys in my first platoon, especially, that was the one that was there was like so much going on. And we were there for 15, almost 16 months. That was the one that was kind of hardest to kind of put all the pieces back together. But some of the guys I've remained in contact with and are good friends with, have incredible memories. And so that was a source. And then the last is just, kind of the exercise of memory. It's really interesting. Like, writing it sort of unlocks like all this neurology, where you have like that one little node of memory, and then you kind of open that up, and then it's just like those neurons start firing, and it can, you find stuff that you kind of had forgotten was there. And sometimes that's like lifting the manhole cover on the sewer, like you find something, you're like, oh God, put the cover back on that. But sometimes like this whole kind of sequence of things all comes rushing back to you. And so it was fairly intense to kind of like sort of like dive into that with your writing. You're just like, oh, okay, I'm banging out some sentences about the way this all went. And then suddenly you're, like the sort of all those little nodes of like memory start to be activated. And then you have those, what's depicted in popular culture is like the flashback, right? Where you're sort of back there again, and you're in the middle of your living room, and you're having that like intense experience. And flashbacks aren't always like, I don't know, there's this very negative stereotype with flashbacks of like, right, you're on the ground.
It could be a good memory, right?
Yeah. You're on the ground crying. It's horrible. But for me, some of them were like, it felt good, it felt good to be there again. And like
was there ever a time that you had to push away though, and just say, I can't do it, it's too intense right now?
Oh yeah. I'd like go for I'd go for like a long walk and just get kind of weirded out, and then I'd talk to Elizabeth, and I don't know. There's certain things that that you kind of like. You don't want to go there. Like, I don't know. There's part of me that like you don't want to kind of smear that on somebody else,
Mhm.
and it's like I think I should just keep that with me. So that was always something I wrestled with too, which was like I've always like she's always been like my confidant, but then there's certain things that you're like they're not in the book, either because I was sort of worried about memorializing it on paper and some of the ramifications of that, or just because I was like, I don't know, like how dark and weird do I want to get here,
Yeah.
So I threw a lot out there, but I held some things back too.
That's good. That's good. So let's talk a little bit about your wife's role, and not only the book, because she's actually a fairly central figure in the book, which I thought was, as I told you, I thought it was really refreshing. I thought the way that you depicted your marriage was brutally honest, refreshingly honest. So I'm wondering, what was her reaction or possible role, as you were writing this? Did she have some input into how she was going to come off screen or come on the page?
Yeah, she told me to put some things. So like she always reads, like she'll read first drafts of my writing and stuff. And there were some things where she was like, "Oh, you kind of held back there, like that whole scene. You got back, and then we got back from Afghanistan, being gone forever, and then we just went to sleep that night." And it's like, obviously, that's not what happened. And so I put some of that out there, and then when she actually saw some of that and it was real, it was like, "Hey, here's the printed book." She was sort of like, "Oh God, maybe that wasn't such a good idea." But it's like, we were young, like that was, like that was real. Like that's, we're young and like in love, and it's just intense, so there were certain things that, yeah, she kind of pushed me on, and then we were kind of like, oh gosh, maybe we have like laid that out there for the whole world. But I'll say this, that it was important to me that she wasn't like a straw man, or like a scarecrow type character, that she was real, and that it's not just this sort of very generic, like the spouse waiting for her husbands, and I think there's some lessons for others. I think a lot of stuff about, kind of military marriages, a lot of what's out there in the world and the media is about, marriages going down in flames, and that happens. I mean, everybody's different, and it's not always going to work, but we got better from it. I'm not going to get into like advice columnist here on this, David, but I'll tell you, like, just one thing, right, was like just expectations, right? And I had this expectation of, like, you come home from a war and you're going to get your spouse especially should give you the grand homecoming, right? And I definitely got that the first time, or it was like the first time coming back, I felt like that was there. But then, by my fourth tour, she's like late picking me up. She's like, oh yeah, shit, it's just, one more thing I got to do today, where it's like we've become kind of desensitized to it. And I think your expectations of each other, have to change. And that was one thing that I think was a big adjustment for me in us, having a healthy relationship, was adopting or kind of modifying my own expectations of her, and like, the fact that, the whole world doesn't revolve around you, even if you are in a war, that other people have their lives, and they need to keep living their lives. So it was, thanks for mentioning that, David. It was a lot of fun to sort of work with her as a character, and to do that again very selectively, to kind of make, I think, to highlight bigger themes about sort of relationships in extremely stressful situations, and then even like long distance relationships, which is a fairly common thing, and I think in American society.
Right. And I really appreciated the fact that she really kind of grounded the narrative, of the book, of the memoir. There was there was you at war, and then there's her back here, you know, and she doesn't always understand what you're doing. And, you know, it's true that a soldier never goes to war alone. You know, he's always going to take everybody else with him, in one way or another, you know. So
Yeah.
whether it's your spouse or your children or your parents or best friend or whatever. So, but she's definitely a good aspect of the book to have in there. So.
Yeah, thanks. And I just, you know, kind of that one last thing on like the home front is, you know, I had like when I got wounded, I was like, I'm not telling her. I was dead set that she wasn't going to know, because I was like, okay, I'm going to recover. I got all of my body parts, and I'm going to be okay. So I'm just not going to tell her. Like, why would I just freak her out? But little did I know that the whole like Army, because I was evacuated, you know, off the battlefield and registered as a WIA, wounded in action, that the Army machine kind of did its thing, right? And she was notified. And, you know, they basically said, hey, he was wounded. We don't, you know, it's like, we don't have a lot of information. He's been evacuated to Germany. And that's like what they told her. And then she didn't hear from me for like 2+ weeks, because I was like, oh, she doesn't need to know. And then finally my commander was like, hey, did you know she knows? And have you told her anything? You know, so I mean, you talk, like the psychological damage of like just being told your loved one's been injured and you'll hear more later, and then 2 weeks go by, you know.
Yeah, I think that was the part in the book I sat up and I told my wife, he did what? He didn't tell her? Oh my gosh. I don't know if that would have flown. I don't think that would have flown in this household, but
no, yeah, I know. It was a dumbass, like young guy move. And anyway.
So what about some of the other folks? Obviously you've kind of done some character composites and, you know, changed names where appropriate, but these are real people that you're writing about. So what has been their reaction, or have you gotten any reaction from anybody else, either you served with or your units, or what's been the reaction from readers?
Yeah, and I've had some people who were there with me that reached out and really were, you know, like on the psychological side of some of the things that I laid out there about, you know, just sort of the darker stuff and struggling with the darker stuff, that were really like, hey, you know, that sort of hit home for me. You know, in terms of how people were depicted, and you know, I think there were some things too where, you know, I didn't like everybody, right? Like you're serving with people, and some of them you're going to get along with really well, and some of them, you know, you're not. And you know, I mostly, David, stayed out of the stuff where I didn't, you know, necessarily have, you know, like I wasn't gonna. I don't think it's fair to kind of trash somebody else where they can't really, you know, speak back in the narrative, right? So there were certain things that I just kind of you know, stayed out of, but I wanted to you know, really depict the other people who were there. I think you know, concisely as best I could. You know, it's tough to sort of paint everybody who is part of the unit, a full picture of them. But I think the reactions have been very, you know, very positive. And it was sort of fun to go back and paint some of the picture of, again, like kind of a lot of like younger guys who are in extremely stressful situations, but are, you know, maintain this incredible sense of humor. And then, you know, back to what I was saying earlier about, it's like, you know, it's the way you fight, right? It's the way you play that I think ultimately counts. And like, you know, a lot of these guys conducted themselves with just, you know, incredible like honor and dignity, even in light of the fact that they're in these horrific circumstances. And you know, we're outnumbered and outgunned and ill supplied, and they, you know, they stuck with it, you know, especially that first tour in Afghanistan.
Yeah, I can say that, you know, I feel like your admiration and pride in those that you served with and served under, it really comes through. Yeah, it really comes through in the book. So
yeah,
let me pop one more question, and then maybe we'll go to some reader questions, or viewer questions, if anybody has some for Jessica. So your first book was a novel, a fictional treatment of Afghanistan. So when did when did the idea for this book, We March at Midnight, when did that come about? Or was it always in your mind to write this book, this memoir? Or did the other book kind of get in the way first? Or how did it, chicken and egg, which came first?
Yeah, it was so like the novel, and I think a lot of good novels, David, and I think just like with your writing, right? For me, I'm guessing here that like it starts with things that are real. And so it's that same baseline of like, here's things that really happened for both books. So that was all sort of jumbled together, where I just sort of like wanted to write. Like I felt like there's sort of all this stuff inside me, and I just sort of like wanted to start getting it out. And so those same like basic experiences, were sort of the foundation for really both stories. The novel form's fun because it's like you start with what's real, and then like you can let your imagination like run a little bit. And,
I know.
Yeah, and you can get to like, I think, deeper truths with like the novel form, because you're not bound to like, okay, here's exactly what happened. So I've always like loved reading. I've always loved novels in particular, and and I read outside of the military stuff a great deal. So I always loved novels, and so that was sort of like I kind of wanted to start there. And I think novels are harder. I think they're way harder to do well than like nonfiction, like a sort of to do any book, right? Big kind of narrative well is difficult, but I think the novel form is like, it was a lot tougher, I think, to sort of make that as good as it could be. And We March at Midnight and the nonfiction side of things, it wasn't easy by any means, but there's not all those like creative decisions necessarily that you have with kind of the novel form. There's a lot of decisions in nonfiction about what do I want in here, what maybe is too much. But some of the creative expectations, like, you have a little bit of a, the bar is in a different place. So.
Right. Well, Jessica, do we have any Q&As from the audience?
We sure do.
All right.
Excuse me. Linda Young asks, Ray, can you please discuss the wisdom / lessons / insights from your reflection on the war?
I joined right after 9/11, and I don't want to be too strong, like old school Ranger here, but I went over there to fight. Like I went over to kill bad guys. That's what I wanted to do. And I volunteered to go to Afghanistan. And that's what I got to do. And, I got in like kind of over my head at first, and then figured it out and felt like I really, the sort of the revenge mission that was in my mind, like I got what I was looking for. And, I feel good about that. The larger, sort of build a strong national democracy in Afghanistan, I think it was always a gigantic stretch. So, like kind of like what I said earlier, I sort of, it was that part of the mission over there was always kind of rough, a little tougher for me to sort of swallow. But we tried, and the book's not just about fighting. It was actually one of the more, intellectually like stimulating experiences I had over there, was like actually interacting with the people in these like very remote mountain villages. And, there's some of them, there's a few like chiefs, kind of like tribal elders and village leaders that I got to know really well. And they were straight up Taliban. They were there, a lot of blood on their hands. And it was really interesting. And those people, and my memories of them are very strong. And I think highly of them, to be 100% honest with you, as people. I'm not like down with the Taliban. That's not what I'm saying. But you kind of like, you're really there on the ground. You're like living in those villages, and you see you kind of see past like a lot of the stereotypes and the kind of, you're on this side and I'm on that side. And it was really interesting. That side of it was, for me, I got a lot of that in 10th Mountain Division. When I was in 2nd Ranger Battalion, it was all counterterrorism. So it was a lot more kind of video game missions, like first person shooter type stuff. So I didn't have that sort of interaction with the people that I did in in the conventional forces. Thanks for that question, Linda.
Excellent. I might piggyback off that question. And you mentioned earlier that the book does contain a lot of things that, like, not tips for leadership, but sort of your experiences in growing as a leader. And I'm curious, sort of two-pronged question, how those leadership techniques you're using it today, in your daily life today, and also how you might need to rely on those techniques and what kind of leader you're still being for the folks that you served with, especially in terms of things like how do they feel about the book and how are they processing their experience and that kind of thing.
Yeah, thanks, Jessica. So there's like, you don't want to like, I kind of, this is a lot to a lot of fun angles there. Like, you don't, like, when I got out of the military, like I was very still like hardcore Ranger officer, and I sort of was interacting with people in the civilian world and the rest of the normal world, like as that person. And I kind of learned that I had to dial it back like a lot. I had to, what I call demilitarize to a great extent. But demilitarizing to me doesn't mean like you're totally starting over. Like, I think a lot of like leadership and like sort of being a good person that other people want to like sort of will look up to is like those principles are universal. And so, I mean, I think something that's always been big and important for me is like listening. Listening to the people who you work with, especially people who are on the front lines, who are out there sort of in like the rubber meets the road, like listen to them and make them feel supported and be willing to share in like the hardship with them, like get out there with them, get out in the field, get dirty, get wet. Just be present. I think that's incredibly important. So some of those basic, like, I think kind of almost like Army cliches, like lead by example, that's something I think is incredibly helpful in the rest of the world. But, you don't want to, you just, if you just talk to people the way that like people in an infantry platoon in a war talk to each other, you would just straight up freak people out. And that's where I had that, like, I was very like rough around the edges when I got out, and I could like string together cuss words, and most like former infantry I can string together cuss words in just incredible ways. And you just, again, you got to try to like just find the right balance. And that was incredibly helpful. To me, it was kind of like my breakthrough of like, I gotta, some of these things I can take with me, but not all of it. I can't be a Ranger officer in combat, for, in this particular setting in
the grocery store.
Yeah. And it's, there's, kind of a joke in the military about like negative reinforcement. Like, we love negative reinforcement in the military. Like, it's okay to just straight up shit on people. Like, that's still something you can do in the military. Whereas most of the rest of the world, like, that's not, no way. Like, you get canned for, harassment and, all kinds of stuff. But it's interesting, kind of the culture in the combat parts in the military is just, it's so different from, I think, a lot of the rest of the world, that it was a tough adjustment.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Keith says, first of all, thank you both for your service. Did either of you ever think that you would eventually be writing your books as you were in your service, like during your tour? Did you think you were going to be writing about it later?
David, you want to go first?
Yeah, I mean, my answer is pretty easy. I started writing my first book, at least Fobbit, while I was in country, while I was in Iraq. Like I said, it was I worked on I just poured everything into my journal. So I extracted a lot of what eventually became present in FOBIT from the journal, made up a lot of stuff, of course. I only really worked earnestly on it as a novel once I returned. And I only really worked super earnestly on it after I got out of the military in 2008. So, but to answer your question, yeah, I knew while I was in country that I would write this book or write a book. As for Brave Deeds, that was something a little bit different that came along later, and that was partially inspired by a true life event that happened and was depicted in or talked about in the Washington Post articles. So, so both of those books, at least FOBIT, I knew that I would write, yeah, from the get-go. But what about you, Ray?
It took a while for me. I didn't think about it at the time, and I wish I had. I really wish I had. It would have made the writing process probably a lot easier to have had, kind of like journal notes. And the other thing I really regret was not taking a lot of pictures. That's something I always I'm like, what was wrong with me? And I see guys and men and women that are kind of posting military pictures and stuff, and there's just wonderful pictures, like, oh, so cool, and you're like, God, I would show that to my kid forever if that was my picture. And I don't know, I feel mine are all like these goofy, like dumb, rushed kind of pictures, and I'm not, it's like half of my face is in there, and then
I think I only have 2 photos of me in full battle rattle.
Right,
everything else is me sitting at a desk. And there's only about 3 or 4 of those. So yeah, I wish I had pictures.
Yeah, it's a shame. That's where you're busy and you don't think about it.
I guess we were busy doing other things.
Yeah. Then you totally regret it. And then you see people have all these like perfect posed pictures, and you're like, well, you're like, man, how do they have time for that?
Pamela Shropshire says, it sounds like an amazing book, and your writing that you read is excellent to see through your eyes. Why did you do 4 tours? And for a non-military person, how does that equate into months or years and time served?
Oh yeah. Good question. So the first tour was almost 16 months, and that's way too long. That was crazy. And then, so that
you guys got extended on that, right?
Yeah, that was, David, I think you were there about the same time frame, right? Where that whole like kind of surge into Iraq was happening. And so we went over there for a 12-month tour, and then we actually got extended to almost, what turned out to be almost 16 months. So that was the first tour. That was in the conventional infantry, the 10th Mountain Division. And then when I was in the Rangers, it was about like 4 to 5 month tours is what we were doing. So, all together, gosh, I was, about 2.5 years, over in conflict in either Iraq or Afghanistan. So 2 tours in Iraq and 2 in Afghanistan. But, the bulk of my time was in Afghanistan. So that's sort of like a lot of more memories from there. 4 tours was, that was just the pace we were going at. And, to me, that's a lot, but, I was with people who were on, they were going on, like they'd done 3 years overseas. They'd done 4 years overseas altogether. My Ranger platoon sergeant, awesome dude, big hero of mine. He was on his like 12th tour. I was like, oh my gosh, how do you do this? And they, it was crazy. I mean, we were in this window where it's, you get the small all volunteer force, and it's just, the same people just kind of cycling back over and over again. So I'm really proud of having been multiple times. And it's also like, you compare yourself to other people who it's like, that's superhuman what they did, that they just did like in and out of war for 15, 20 years.
Excellent. Well, I still have Do you mind if we go a little bit over? Because I've got some good questions here, but I'm also watching the clock.
Yeah.
I don't mind as long as viewers don't mind.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure. Yeah.
They can always tune out.
Okay. Chuck says, you mentioned demilitarizing. Have you had any pushback from the size measuring contest types who always have to say, I did it this way, or attempt to challenge your experience there from either books or just in everyday life? How do you handle them, or do you avoid them?
Yeah, I think that there's a super macho culture in the military, and especially in the combat arms parts of the military. There's this like deep machoism, and that's still in here. That's like, I'll never get that out. But you kind of you feel like you're there. You did some things. You did your job well, and again, it doesn't have to be carrying a rifle. I think any good, like everybody there is sort of advancing the effort. So I don't really get too hung up in that stuff, man. I have a lot of sort of I think self-confidence about what I did over there, and I feel awesome about it. And I have a lot of friends that weren't in fighting roles, and some that like actually upsets me is when they're kind of like, oh, I never did like what you were doing over there, and they kind of qualify stuff before they start talking to you, and you're like, that's BS, man. Like everybody's contributing, and the infantry in particular have their sense of self-worth is like way blown out of proportion.
I'm glad you said that.
There you go. It's out there. I did it. I turned on my own.
You're gonna get the hate mail now, man.
So Linda asked, is it difficult to feel valued for your service while at the same time hearing critiques of U.S. involvement in both Iraq and Afghanistan?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. There's like, I think there is a lot of, compared to like what I've seen, what I've read, what I've learned about like Vietnam and the way people were treated, like coming back from Vietnam. I never had anything negative from people. It was always, always incredible. I remember when I was like home on midterm leave, we were in this elevator. Elizabeth and I were in this elevator, and I can't remember the woman. She's like, your haircut or something, just the way you look. She's just like, are you military or something? And then we started talking. I was like, I'm home on leave from Afghanistan, and she gave us like a bunch of money and like paid for our room at this hotel. And it's just, it was always like people were, that you hear about a lot of generic patriotism, like just thanks for your service, but it's very superficial. But I saw like real things, people doing things that were just like genuinely, like they really were saying thanks and that they appreciated you. And so that was my experience. And David, I don't know what yours was like coming.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I've gotten a lot of thank you for my service. I got a lot of thanks, but yeah, and then at the different bookstore events and readings and stuff that I've done, the number of people that come up, that are just genuinely appreciative of the books that we write and being able to put things down on paper. And I know you're going to get the reaction, that similar reaction, if you haven't already, to We March at Midnight, because there's just a wealth of information in there that the quote unquote average person, the person who hasn't been served in the military, they can draw a lot from that. So but yeah, I've never had the being spit on or any other Vietnam era type of experiences that people unfortunately have had. It's just I guess the American public just doesn't appreciate, they're not able to separate the soldier from the politics a lot of the time. So you have to realize we are just human beings doing the job.
Yeah, well said.
Indeed. Well, speaking of that, what encouragement or advice do you have for current service members that are looking to write a military-inspired novel?
Well, I would say that the advice for any writer is just sit down and write it. and there's going to be, if you're writing about your war experience or any war experience, there might be some really difficult, dark moments that you have to write about and push through those, and just be honest with yourself on the page. So
I'd say, yeah, I love that, David, that, just start doing it. Like, don't sort of, I don't know. I think if you sort of like look for validation, if you think too hard about it, you're going to find a way to sort of stop doing it.
Right.
Just go for it. Just get it all out there, and then you could figure it out later. And then I think it's really important to read a lot. I think you have to read a lot to be a good writer. And I've always been an avid reader, and I think it helps. And don't just read don't just read other military novels. Read whatever, read anything.
Right.
Just to kind of get the machinery working.
Two folks are curious, Ray. Keith says, love the latest book. What comes next? And Pamela says, what are you doing now, and what is next for you?
I'd like to do another novel. I had a lot of fun with the first novel. It's really cool. Like the form of it is really enjoyable. I'd love the West. I'd love to do something like set, in the West and sort of outside of the sort of war genre. So I've been tinkering with some ideas. One of the parts of writing that's interesting is I've got this great idea, and you kind of get into it and you start building it, and you're like, God, it sucks. And you throw it out, and then you start over. So, I've done a little bit of that here in the last 6 months or so. I'm going to get there. It's got to be epic. I've like, that's where I like you want it to be epic, and you shouldn't, like, that's bad advice. Like, don't try to write an epic book. But that's like my instinct is like, oh God, it has to be the greatest book ever. Which is, it's the total, psych yourself out strategy.
Well, you mentioned that one of your best tips for being a writer is to be a reader. So I'm going to ask the perennial bookseller question. First, I want to know what novels you were carrying with you in your pack when you were in country. And then I want to know what you're reading now.
Okay, cool. Oh yeah, I'll go first, David.
Go ahead. Yeah.
I read a lot of like kind of classic stories, like King Solomon's Mines. I love that one. Treasure Island. It's like kind of a kid's book, but oh my God, Long John Silver is like one of the greatest characters ever created. So I was reading a lot of stuff like that. Like kind of classic things. I really like stuff about the West. Tom McGuane I'm a huge fan of his. Things set in the West. The Big Sky, A.B. Guthrie is another favorite of mine.
Like David was making a stack there.
I'm going to tell you why I'm making a small stack, because I'm literally reading 9. I'm in the midst of 9 books right now. I can't remember them all. That's terrible. I couldn't remember the whole list, but off the top of my head, okay, I'm reading Anna Karenina. All right. I'm reading Barack's latest book. And I'm just about to start this new graphic novel by Kristen Radke. It's called Seek You. And I loved her first book. So those are 3 of the 9, I guess. And as for the things I carried over to Iraq, to include that book by Tim O'Brien, The Things They Carried, I took an entire footlocker of books. I must have taken like 50 books, thinking that I would have all the free time in the world to read, which I did have a lot of free time or downtime each day, but those hours were usually while other guys were off playing video games or going to the gym to work out or whatever, I was in writing or reading. So I carried everything from, Tim O'Brien, Catch-22, Charles Dickens, Don Quixote I read while I was over there. So I got caught up on my reading list, my bucket list.
Classics. I like it. Ray, are you going with A.B. Guthrie and Tom McGuane is what you're reading today, or are you?
Yeah, big
Okay.
fan. Yeah, there's what's the oh gosh, he's got a collection of short stories. Tom McGuane, it's just amazing. I'm blanking on the. I think it's called.
Is it Cloudburst?
Cloudburst, that's what it is. Yeah, sorry, I get it mixed up. Yeah, it's Crowfair, Gallatin Canyon, and Cloudburst are all kind of collections of his short stories that are just amazing. Yeah,
You cannot go wrong with McGuane.
yeah.
No. And he's practically a neighbor for you, Ray.
Yeah, that's right.
He does live in the Paradise Valley.
I'm not stalking Tom McGuane, I swear.
Excellent. Well, I want to thank you both so much for joining us this evening. I'm sorry if we weren't able to get to your questions, but if you haven't already, you can visit, there's a link in the chat to purchase your copy of We March at Midnight. And thank you both so much for joining us this evening. All the applause, all the thank yous. I'm sorry that there can't be a swell of applause here virtually, but
yeah, thank you so much for hosting, Jessica. David, thank you so much. I'm a huge fan of yours. You're amazing. You're an author's author, and thank you everybody for coming and spending time with us.
Yes.
Yeah, thanks, Ray, and thanks especially to Jessica and the folks at Country Bookshelf.
Thank you guys. Tune in next week for more. And don't forget to buy your copy of We March at Midnight.